It started out like any ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was driving back from a client meeting, still in my suit and tie, sipping lukewarm coffee while mentally running through the rest of my calendar. The sun was high, traffic was light. Then I saw the red and blue lights flashing in my rearview mirror. I pulled over calmly. No speeding, no broken taillight, I had no idea why I was being stopped. The officer approached with a slow swagger, one hand resting on his belt. He leaned into the open window, gave me a once-over, and smirked. "Well, look at you," he said. "Fancy suit. Big day at the office?" I gave him a polite nod. "Yes, sir. I just left a meeting downtown." He scoffed. "Aha. License and registration." I handed them over without a word. I'd been through this before, too many times. But something about his tone, the exaggerated skepticism in his voice, told me this one might drag on. He looked at my license, then back at me, his expression twisting. "You a lawyer or something?" "Yes," I said. "I am." He chuckled, loud and mocking. "Sure you are. And I'm the president." He walked back to his cruiser, still laughing. I stayed calm, staring out at the horizon, reminding myself not to react. Because I knew something he didn't. Tomorrow morning, I'd be standing in a courtroom, and so would he. The traffic stop dragged on longer than necessary. The officer returned twice, once to ask if I had any outstanding warrants he should know about, and again to suggest I must be doing pretty well for yourself, driving a car like this. Each time, I answered politely, resisting the urge to push back. I'd learned that when someone was looking for a reaction, the worst thing you could do was give them one. Eventually, he handed my documents back. "No tickets today," he said. "But maybe next time don't look so suspicious cruising through this area, all right?" I nodded once. "Have a good day, officer." As he walked away, I caught the tail end of his smirk in the side mirror, still amused by the idea that someone like me could be anything other than what he assumed. He didn't realize that in less than 24 hours, I wouldn't just be someone in a suit behind a wheel. I'd be the lead defense attorney on a major case. And he'd be on the witness stand. The next morning, I walked into the courthouse early. I liked to get settled before proceedings began, review notes, double-check arguments, center myself. It was a high-stakes case. My client, a small business owner, had been charged with obstruction and resisting arrest. The arresting officer? The same one who had pulled me over the day before. I didn't recognize his name immediately when I first got the case. But when I saw him listed as the primary witness, I'd gone back to look at his photo in the file. That smirk, that posture, I remembered it too well. As the courtroom filled, I noticed him walk in, still in uniform, taking his place near the front. He hadn't seen me yet. When the judge called the session to order and I rose from behind the defense table, his eyes landed on me. For a split second, he froze. The color drained from his face like water from a broken pipe. His jaw twitched. He blinked twice as if trying to recalibrate what he was seeing. Gone was the swagger. Gone was the smirk. He knew that I could feel the tension shift in the room the moment our eyes locked. He stared at me like he'd seen a ghost, his confident posture replaced by something rigid and uncertain. I didn't flinch. I simply straightened my notes, addressed the court with a calm, "Good morning, Your Honor," and continued like nothing was out of the ordinary. But for him, everything was different now. As the prosecutor began their opening statements, I noticed the officer stealing glances at me, his jaw clenched tighter each time. He was no longer just giving testimony, he was giving it in front of someone he had belittled, someone he assumed would never share the same space with him, let alone stand across from him as an equal, or a challenger. When it was my turn to cross-examine, I approached slowly, deliberately. Each step was a reminder, not of revenge, but of presence. That I belonged here, and always had. He shifted in his seat as I opened the folder and looked up. "Officer Daniels," I began, my voice calm and direct. "Let's talk about the incident report you filed the night of the arrest." His eyes dropped to the table. He wasn't ready. "According to your report," I said, holding the paper lightly between my fingers, "you claimed the defendant was uncooperative and escalated the situation without provocation. Is that correct?" Officer Daniels cleared his throat. "That's what I wrote, yes." I took a step closer. "And yet, there's body cam footage, your own, showing the defendant calmly asking why he was being stopped. Multiple times. Never raising his voice." He shifted again, his hands gripping the edges of the chair. "Well, sometimes people appear calm, but their body language," I cut in, still even-toned. "So now it's about body language? Not actual resistance? Because your report didn't mention anything about nonverbal behavior. Only that he refused to comply." There was a brief silence in the room. The judge looked up from his notes. The jury watched intently. I could feel the officer struggling to recalibrate. Yesterday, he saw me as just another man behind the wheel. Today, I was methodically dismantling his credibility, in front of a courtroom full of eyes. I leaned in just enough. "Officer Daniels, would you like to revise your statement?" He hesitated. And in that hesitation, the cracks began to show. Officer Daniels licked his lips, clearly stalling for time. I stand by the report as written," he muttered, but his voice lacked the certainty it carried in the field. I didn't press him immediately. I let the silence stretch, just long enough for the jury to feel the weight of his hesitation. Then I calmly slid a printed still frame from the bodycam footage onto the evidence screen. "This is your interaction with my client, correct?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "In this frame, my client's hands are clearly visible. He's standing still. He's asking, quote, 'Am I being detained?' That doesn't exactly scream noncompliance, does it?" He shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. "And yet," I continued, "within 30 seconds of this moment, you drew your weapon and forced him to the ground. No raised voice, no sudden movement from him. Just, an assumption. Isn't that right?" The courtroom was dead quiet. Even the prosecution looked tense. I took a breath, looked him dead in the eye, and asked the question I'd been waiting to ask. "Tell me, officer, if you had known he was the owner of that store, a licensed professional with no criminal record, would you have handled things differently?" He didn't answer. Couldn't. The truth was already written on his face. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Officer Daniels, the counsel asked you a question." The officer swallowed hard, his voice nearly inaudible. "I don't know." "You don't know," I repeated, letting it linger in the air. I turned slightly, facing the jury now. "That's the foundation of this case, ladies and gentlemen, not facts, not threat, but assumption." Then I pivoted back to him. "You didn't ask questions. You didn't de-escalate. You acted on an instinct, not on evidence or danger. And now you're under oath, unable to justify the use of force you documented." He looked like he wanted to disappear into the seat. I could see something shift in the jurors' expressions, subtle but real. The image they were given by the arrest report was no longer lining up with what they were seeing and hearing. I walked slowly back to the defense table and said, "No further questions." As I sat, I caught one last glance at Officer Daniels. His face was pale. The courtroom, my courtroom now, had turned the mirror back on him. And for the first time, he didn't like what he saw. When the court recessed for lunch, Officer Daniels practically bolted from the witness stand. I watched him leave through a side door, his shoulders tense, his steps quick. He looked like a man who just walked through a fire he thought he'd lit for someone else. Outside in the hallway, a few reporters lingered, catching snippets of what had happened. They weren't allowed to record, but they'd seen enough to know something had shifted in that courtroom. One of them approached me. "You've done a lot of defense work in this city. Ever seen a witness fold like that?" I gave a measured smile. I don't go into court looking to make people fold. I go in looking for the truth. Back in the courtroom, the prosecution tried to recover during redirect, but the damage had been done. The jurors had seen what they needed. They had watched a confident, composed witness unravel when pressed for answers that should have been easy, if the story had been honest. When we resumed, the prosecution tried to steer the case back toward the charges against my client, but the momentum had shifted. The jury didn't just see a man defending himself from wrongful accusation anymore. They saw the system misfire, and someone trying to clean it up from within. By closing arguments, the mood in the courtroom had transformed completely. I stood before the jury, letting a brief silence settle before I spoke. This case was never about defiance, I began. It was about misunderstanding, about bias, and about someone being treated as less than, based not on their actions, but on assumptions. I paced slowly, deliberately. My client didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He didn't resist. He asked a question, a legal one: am I being detained? That was his so-called escalation. And for that, he was thrown to the ground, charged, and dragged through this process. I gestured toward Officer Daniels' report on the screen behind me. And when given the chance to explain why, under oath, Officer Daniels couldn't. Because there is no explanation. Just instinct. Just assumption. I stopped, looking each juror in the eye. This courtroom is not a place for instincts. It's a place for truth. For fairness. And for justice. I returned to my seat. The room was still. The judge gave the final instructions. The jury filed out. And we waited. The wait felt longer than it was, 2 hours, maybe 3. My client sat beside me, tapping his foot anxiously, trying not to let it show. I just kept my eyes forward, my fingers steepled under my chin. Finally, the bailiff returned. Jury has reached a verdict. Everyone stood as the jurors filed back in, expressions unreadable. The foreperson stood, holding a folded slip. The clerk read aloud, on the charge of obstruction of justice, not guilty. On the charge of resisting arrest, not guilty. A soft gasp came from the back of the courtroom, my client's wife. He exhaled so deeply it almost sounded like a sob. I placed a steady hand on his shoulder. The judge thanked the jury and adjourned the court. As we walked out, Officer Daniels remained seated, unmoving, his eyes fixed on the ground. No more smirks. No more mocking. We stepped past him without a word. Outside, the sun was bright, the sky open. My client turned to me. You think he knew who I was? I gave a small smile. He does now. The story made quiet waves, just enough to ripple through the local legal community and a few circles in city leadership. There was no press conference, no viral headline. But within days, I started getting calls, from colleagues, from young attorneys, from people who said they saw what happened in that courtroom and felt something shift. As for Officer Daniels, word was he'd taken some personal leave. Whether it was voluntary or encouraged, I didn't ask. I wasn't interested in vengeance. What mattered was that the truth had spoken louder than assumption. My client went back to running his business. I went back to defending others who didn't always get the benefit of the doubt. But something stayed with me from that day, something deeper than the verdict. It was the look on Daniel's face when he realized who I was, not just a man in a nice car, not just a lawyer, but someone who demanded to be seen in full. Because in that moment, the uniform, the badge, the assumptions, none of it mattered. Only the truth did. And this time, the truth won. Weeks later, I was back in court on a different case when I spotted Officer Daniels in the hallway, out of uniform this time. He looked quieter. Not broken, just reflective, like someone still processing what had happened. We made eye contact for a second. He hesitated, then took a few steps in my direction. I didn't expect you, he said quietly. I nodded. That much was clear. He gave a dry, almost bitter laugh. Guess I needed the reminder. About assumptions. About how fast they can make you wrong. There was no apology. But it wasn't avoidance either. It was something else. Honest, maybe. Humbled. I don't hold grudges, I replied. But I don't forget either. He gave a slight nod, then walked away. That moment, brief as it was, stayed with me longer than the trial. Because change doesn't always come from the headlines or the speeches. Sometimes, it starts in discomfort. In realization. In being seen by someone you tried not to see. And sometimes, the courtroom isn't just about justice for one man. It's a mirror, for everyone in it.